I don't think we quite have a quorum yet. Cerise just arrived, so now we have a quorum.
Okay. Well, I would like to call to order then this special meeting of the Cunningham Township Board for Monday, March 22nd, 2021. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu,
Here.
Mr. Sachs,
Here.
Ms. Hersey,
Here.
Mr. Brown, Mr. Roberts, Mr. Colebrook,
Here.
Mr. Miller, Mayor Diane Marlin.
Present. Next item on the agenda is public input. Does anyone wish to address the Cunningham Town Board? Please raise your hand. I'm not seeing any hands raised. Dennis Roberts has now joined the meeting. Okay, we'll move on to the one agenda item, which is approval of the annual town board meeting agenda. Danielle?
Yes, good evening. Thank you for your patience for this special meeting. So each year, the township holds its annual meeting. It must be held on the second Tuesday in April. Last year, due to the governor's executive order, we were not able to hold, we had the option of holding the township meeting, but we had to get special approval from the public health department. I determined that it was not safe to go forward with such meeting. And so we will now, although this year we will now hold the town board meeting, the annual meeting, the second Tuesday of April. And Diane, I got your memo and it verifies what I had seen with the township officials of Illinois, which is essentially townships are going forward with their annual meetings and they have to at least have an in-person component. So thank you for your information about the capacity limitations of City Hall. Typically, these meetings are fairly brief and they're focused on providing a financial report to the electorate around the township. This year, we also have a basement full of used furniture and kind of, I would say, not very valuable items, but as per township statute, we are required to go through a process at the annual town board meeting to get approval to dispose that property, and the property will essentially what happens with public bodies is there will be an announcement and it's and people can come and take away property. You can designate nonprofits first to come, and it's most likely that we will do that as the housing authority has done and the city has done in the past. There will also be program updates from the supervisor and assessor's office. As you know, we've been working on a strategic plan. We will be presenting that, kind of getting input and presenting a sketch of that at the township meeting the day before at the annual meeting, and also at the continuum of service providers to the homeless on that same day. So that's kind of an opportunity for us to get input. It will look into whether or not there can be a Zoom component, unless Diane, you're aware, Mayor, if you're aware that there cannot be, if we're able to have a Zoom component. Otherwise, we're limited to 26 people in the meeting, and I'd like to really make sure that we have a safe meeting. I think that the town board meetings, if the town board would like to address other issues, that might be a safer venue for us to have it at the actual town board meeting the night before, rather than in the in-person meeting on that Tuesday. But of course, the agenda is set by you. So this is just our proposal.
Okay. Yeah, I think the Zoom component, you'd have to check with the township officials of Illinois. They seem to be the ones running the show on this one. So,
I already have.
Yeah.
And the president of the Township Officials of Illinois stated that this is not a meeting that is specifically designed for the township board, it is for the electors. And in order for the electors to be able to come and do what they need to do, we have to have a meeting where they can come in, but we need to just make sure that we can control the crowd. They must wear masks. So that's what he said. There's no way that the electorate will be able to interact in this township meeting if we don't have it where we can at least get some in here.
Okay. So
Okay.
thank you, clerk. I appreciate that, Phyllis.
Mhm.
Did they specifically prohibit having a Zoom component, or what was your understanding of that as
Yes.
an option? Okay, so it has to be in person.
Yes,
So
it does.
so I think that what I'll probably do is for feedback, I'm going through a feedback process for the strategic plan, and I will emphasize the Monday meeting on Zoom for that feedback. Of course, the electorate can also come on Tuesday, and if somebody is not able to join on Zoom, that would be a good alternative for them. I think that's it. Simple.
Okay,
I saw Sharice had a hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to state that I have a conflict in time regarding the second Tuesday in April, because that is also my library board meeting night. And I've that's happened before when we did it one other time before, and I like ran from the library board meeting over to the city building so that we could do that, but it's been a conflict. So I don't know, what should I do with that?
So the town board is actually not required to attend. It's actually a meeting of the electorate. The supervisor must attend. Typically the assessor attends. So although of course you're welcome to, and I believe, I'm not sure if the clerk is required to attend or not, actually.
Yes, I am.
Typically the clerk has. So, okay. So I think that, I would say it is at your discretion whether you attend, and we will be repeating the same content the night before with regard to the strategic plan.
Okay.
any other questions? Dennis?
Yeah, so at this meeting, I understand the citizens can bring forward topics of discussion. How would that work out? Would they have to have them already submitted if the meeting's going to be, you said, the April 2nd?
Yeah, so the deadline to submit topics is 2 weeks before. In approving this agenda, typically, and I know at one point there was a advisory referendum about cannabis and marijuana use that the electorate put on, and that was a good way to survey the public and kind of see where they stood. And I think Urbana fared well on that township advisory item. But I believe the time period is now closed and that you are confirming the agenda at this point.
Thank you.
Is there a motion to confirm this agenda for the April 13th annual town meeting?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Okay, moved by Mary Alice, seconded by Jared. Are there any further discussion? All right. Would you please call the roll, Phyllis?
Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Sachs,
Yes.
Ms. Hersey,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mr. Colebrook,
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
That motion passes. And again, the annual town meeting will be Tuesday, April 13th, 2021, 6 p.m. in the City Council chambers. Masking and distancing regulations will apply. We'll be pre-bridge phase, so we'll still be in the monitoring phase in terms of the governor's COVID guidelines. With no further business before the Cunningham Town Board, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you very much. Good evening.
Thank you very much. We'll move right into the city council meeting, which is also announced to be starting at 6:30 p.m. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu,
Here.
Mr. Sachs,
Here.
Ms. Hersey, Mr. Brown,
Here.
Mr. Roberts,
Here.
Mr. Colebrook,
Here.
Mr. Miller,
Here.
Mayor Marlin.
Here. And I believe Sharice, you're unmuted at this point.
Yeah, I thought I said here, I hit the little space
Yeah.
bar, but it didn't come up. Okay.
Councilmember Hersey is here as well. Okay, next up is approval of minutes from the proceedings of regular and special meetings, and this will be for the February 22nd, 2021 meeting. Is there a motion for approval?
I'll move approval of the minutes from February 22nd.
I'll second.
Any corrections? Okay, that was moved by Mary Alice, seconded by Sharice. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Sachs,
Yes.
Ms. Hersey,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mr. Colebrook,
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
That motion passes. Next item is public input and presentations. We'll begin with presentations, and that will be a continuation of the council member training session featuring the Urbana Free Library. And Carol Mitten had a couple of comments before we get started.
Thank you. Just wanted to thank everybody again for taking the time tonight to attend another one of our training sessions. And as we had discussed last time, we will be posting these separately, but rather than posting them with each agenda, and then people would have to remember which meeting night a particular item was on, we'll be dedicating a web page to this so that it'll become a sort of a standing reference library for these introductions. And then as we do our deep dives, those can be reference points. So as soon as we get that prepared, we'll send out the link. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Celeste Choate, who is the executive director of the Urbana Free Library.
Thank you so very much. I appreciate everyone's time and attention tonight. I'm going to share my screen and talk to you about the Urbana Free Library and its relationship with the fabulous city of Urbana. So I am the executive director, and I'm delighted to be here with you tonight. You can expect to see me at city council meetings at least a couple of times a year. The library has a statutory obligation to provide the city council with an annual report. So you'll see me in August. But before then, I will be providing a budget presentation. So I look forward to seeing you again soon in just a couple of months. And there are some cuties on the page here. We are always happy to promote the different reading programs that the library has, and 1,000 Books Before Kindergarten is one of those wonderful programs. Oops. So we're here to talk about the relationship of the Urbana Free Library with the city of Urbana. If you look, you can see on the left here under boards and commissions, that's where the library fits in. The library is not actually a department of the city, but we are definitely under the city's umbrellas. The library board is a governmental body that is legislated in state law. The Illinois Local Library Act, which is in the ILCS compiled statutes, chapter 75, act 5. But what's exciting about this is how closely we work with the city and how much the library benefits from that, and the city does, I hope, as well. So we are efficient when we work together. We regularly talk with city employees for this or that. They help us out with questions from whether or not do we really need to repave the staff parking lot, to collaborating together to purchase Munis, the new financial system that we work on together. And we're in the same health insurance pool as the city. So in working with the library in this partnership collaborative way, the city and the library and our constituents all benefit because we're more efficient and we position ourselves to serve our community in the same ways. We are thankful every day for our strong relationship with our colleagues at the city, and we could not run the library as efficiently and at the same cost without their assistance. What we need from city council members is we need your help getting the word out about different library offerings to your constituents. Expect me or one of my colleagues to be in touch on an at least quarterly basis, letting you know different ways that you can support the community by supporting library efforts. For example, during National Library Card Sign Up Month, we're going to ask that you reach out to your constituents and ask them to get library cards. Businesses also qualify for free library cards. And as far as being free, those are tax dollars how it work, and they've already paid for the library services. So we want to make sure that they get the benefit of that as much as possible. In addition to these regular updates, we're going to have some special ones now and again as well. For example, the library is working with former director Fred Schliff on a building program process. And part of that process will include having community focus groups and ways for them to give written comments as well. So we want to make sure that all the community members know, whether they use the library or not, that we encourage them to talk to us about this building program process. The library and the city also share a block. So you've been to the library and you know this block with Elm Street on the top and Green Street on the bottom and Race Street on one side and Cedar on the other side. Between the city and the library, we own all but one piece of property. So it is good when we work together in this way. Part of the parking lot's owned by the city, part of the parking lot is owned by the library, but the city maintains and manages the parking lot, taking care of the physical infrastructure and the snow plowing. And then the city also gets the benefit of the parking meter revenue. So we appreciate knowing that the city has gotten that taken care of for us. Also, there is a property on this block that currently is owned by the city that will in 2026 be turned over to the library, given a 2004 agreement. Back in the day when the library was looking to expand, the Library Foundation paid the city council, paid the city money to purchase a building and also money towards this other building, which is called the Morrow Building. And it's where the Bluebird Boutique currently is. So currently the city owns it. And in 2026, it will come into the library's ownership. So if you're interested in more details like that, let me know. The library also owns property across the street. So on the southwest corner of Race Street and Green Street, the library owns what's known as the Weber Building and the small parking lot behind that, but also owns the staff parking lot where library staff park. And we own that green space that is between the Township building and the Weber Building. Currently, we partner with the Township and we rent that green space to the Township for $1 a year. And then they use that to help the community out by sponsoring that community garden. We also partner with the Township, which is another body of government that the City Council oversees in your role as the Township Board. We partner with the Cunningham Township to now provide library cards to people who are homeless but residing in Urbana. And that is a great benefit to everyone. So the library is its own independent entity in the respect that we do all of our services. So the people of Urbana give feedback to the Library Board of Trustees who direct my work. They provide assistance at the high level, setting policy and budget, hiring and firing and evaluating director. They see at that 30,000 foot look, and then the library staff implement the initiatives the library board has put forward. You can also see that there's a couple of other bodies we'll talk about in just a moment. There's a foundation board and a Friends of the Library board as well. The library has currently just over 70 employees across these different departments, 24 full-time employees, 6 part-time employees, and 42 hourly employees. There is a 9-member library board of trustees. Trustees are appointed for 3-year terms by the mayor with you, the city council's approval. And state law allows for up to 1 city council person to be a member of the library board at the same time. And so currently it's Charisse, but Bill and Mayor Marlin and Jared have also been library board members, and we thank you all for your service. So the library, with all these employees at these different departments, is a full service operation. We serve community members of all ages. We offer everything from traditional books and DVDs to ebooks, e-magazines, streaming music and videos. We also have a very strong collection of what they call the Library of Things. And encompasses musical instruments for youth and adults, a crafts collection, a productivity collection, children's developmental toys and puzzles, board games, hands-on science kits, and more. And we'll talk more about this when I come back and talk about the library's budget later this year. We offer regular programming and place for people to be, and we enjoy partnering with other community organizations. For example, the Teen Open Lab is an after-school program that over the past 7 years has served over 27,000 teens. We partner with the CU Community Fab Lab, the iSchool at Illinois, the City of Urbana Public Arts and Culture Commission, and more, in order to serve our teens in the way that they want to be served and deserve service. So just to quickly mention other library supporters, we have 2 other boards, the Friends of the Urbana Free Library and the Urbana Free Library Foundation, and they have a similar goal of supporting the library, but different focal points. They are separate independent 501c3 organizations. And as the executive director, I'm an ex officio board member of both boards. The Friends' main goal is to foster closer and supportive relations between the library and its residents. They, in the past few years, have been primarily focusing on the 3 book sales a year, and which raise about $17,000. And we put that money straight back into books for the collection, and then also purchasing prize books for summer reading and winter reading, and that 1,000 books before kindergarten collections. Sorry, not collections, distributions to the community. So the Friends' goal is to get books into the hands of residents, and this is one of the ways they do that. They also provide funds for the gardens around the library to make the place beautiful. And they did a renovation of Megan's Garden on the north side of the building, which is the photo you see here on the left. The Foundation Board focuses in developing and increasing library resources. So they encourage gifts of money, property, and other materials having value to the library. And they have raised millions of dollars for the library over the years. They were a main supporter of the expansion of the library in 2005. In addition to me being an ex officio member of the Foundation Board, the library board president is also an ex officio member, and then the mayor or her designee is an ex officio member. So currently, and for the past few years actually, Vince Gustafson is the current representative on the Foundation Board, and he's just been such a big help. We're grateful every day that we get to talk to Vince about foundation things. The foundation focuses on a large annual campaign drive in the fall, in the Thanksgiving timeframe, and they raise tens of thousands or $100,000. They focus on smaller services like the UFL Live monthly concerts, as well as sponsoring an archives staff person to process the Chanute Air Force Base Museum collection. And then they also focus on larger gifts, for example, gifts of property. We talked about the property owned on the southwest corner of Race and Green that was purchased by the foundation back in 2013. They also purchased the former Aller building site back in 2016, and they funded replacing the chiller on the library and the repair of the historic porch. So again, millions of dollars spent to support the library. So how do we do what we do? We used city documents and other documents to know more about our community to develop our strategic plan. So we're excited about the new comprehensive plan that you are developing, and we will use that to work on our next strategic plan in fiscal 23. We also look at some of your more granular documents, so comprehensive plan at the high level, but other things like parking studies help us inform our work and provide better service and use our resources better in the community. Our strategic plan is actionable and being implemented on a daily level. And if you're interested in seeing how we're putting it into place with the 4 pillars of embrace, enrich, empower, and enhance, we have a monthly director's report in the board packet, and we talk about the different initiatives each month that fit those different pillars of the strategic plan. Our board wanted a plan we would use, and we use it every day. So we have a vision of nurturing growth by sparking curiosity and fostering a sense of belonging. And our mission is to encourage learning and enrich lives by providing access to diverse resources and programs. How is the library funded? Well, you, the city council, approve a budget for the city, and the library board approves a budget that's part of that. So the library board approves it, it's incorporated into the city budget, And we work closely with our colleagues at the city to make sure that everything fits well together. The city levies the property taxes on behalf of the library, and those come out of the general fund. So I know that it's important for the property tax levy to remain flat or even decrease. And so we work really hard to make sure we're efficient with our funds so that we can be part of this initiative to be responsible and keep that property taxes low so that people are encouraged to live and play and work in Urbana. Property taxes are very important to the library. They're about 80% of our revenue, and this year is 83%. So property taxes are of critical importance, and we're always looking out to see if there's legislation that's going to carve a little bit away from property taxes. In addition to what's listed here specifically, I want to highlight that some revenue is received directly from the city. The city pays the library staff's IMRF, some of the FICA that goes towards library staff, and there is funding from the Ameren contract that you get that also partly comes to the library, and every little dime counts. The library's budget is very tight, and so we're grateful for all the different ways the library is assisted by the city. Some of the services we offer are electronic cards, especially during COVID time, curbside pickup. We started a seed lending library. You can now ask for books in more bundles, which are items across all collections on a particular topic that you can ask for all age levels. We pull them together. We continued curbside service, and we've got electronic materials, as I mentioned. So even during COVID, when the library couldn't be open physically at all the times, we continued to provide service and worked really hard with the city of Urbana in providing good, safe measures for staff. And so we can be consistent across the city and the library when possible. I mentioned the comprehensive plan. We do look to the city and the way you're positioning yourself, and we use your tools to position ourselves. We serve the same community. And again, we integrate our efforts together. We are delighted that on the city's Imagine Urbana page that many people are already putting up posts about the library, and we're working together to share our contacts and community resources so that as the city reaches out to the community, that you're getting to as many people as possible. And as the city learns about new resources and community members and community groups, the city's sharing that information with us so we can do a better job as well. Please contact us if you have questions and comments, questions about things you can do for the community that we can do for the community together. Please visit our website to learn more or email me at celeste@urbanafree.org.
We have time for a few questions for Celeste. Does anyone have a question from the panelists? Dennis.
Celeste, one of the most popular events that the library holds, or the Friends of the Library hold, is the book sale.
Mhm.
Are you collecting books and during this time, and will there be a book sale, do you think, this summer? What's the chances?
We are collecting books, and I have not heard from the Friends about whether there'll be a summer book sale or not. It's going to depend a lot about vaccination rates and how the state is opening up. But they are still sorting the books and getting them ready for a book sale, that's for sure.
Great.
Oh,
Okay,
also
so
there's an Etsy store and an Amazon store. So if you're looking to buy Friends books, you can't touch them in the same way, but you can shop online.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Celeste? Colin?
Yeah, this is just a minor kind of question, but on the staff structure page, I noticed, I think it was the program something manager, was connected in a bit of a different way. I was curious what that meant in terms of like reporting responsibilities and that sort of thing.
Good question.
And then in general, I just want to say thank you, because the Urbana Free Library, in my opinion, is one of the greatest assets the city has. And it's one of the best libraries I've seen of all the places that I've lived in my life. So thank you for your hard work. And yeah.
Thank you so much. It is a joy every day to come in here and serve this community. Staff here, as they are at the city, are so helpful and so engaged and so willing to work hard and come up with new things for our community. The reporting structure on the chart there, there's a person who manages programs. So she is not responsible for all the work of the people underneath her. She's responsible for their work with regards to programming. So she also supervises the archives programs as well, but it's an Excel spreadsheet. It's not the prettiest chart.
Any other questions?
Grace.
Yeah, I had one. Thanks again for the wonderful presentation. Definitely appreciate it and everything at the library. And I'm sorry if I missed this in the presentation, but I just wanted to clarify if there was a separate avenue for input on the library comprehensive plan specifically, or if you're going through the Imagine Urbana site, or if there's a separate one people should know about for the library comprehensive plan.
Thanks, Grace. I appreciate you asking. The library strategic plan is all set for now, but we'll probably start in mid 2022 for our next strategic plan. And the building program that I think you're referring to is, we don't have that up yet. So as soon as I have that information up, we're looking to start in the next couple of months through early fall. We'll definitely get that out and make sure the information is available. Thank you for asking.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mike.
Yeah, Celeste, thank you for your presentation. I saw on your flow chart there was a facilities manager position that's open. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Has that been open for a while? Are you in the middle of looking for someone? Is that position in limbo? What's the status of that?
We've never, in the 7 years I've been here and in the most recent past before that, there has not been a person devoted just to facilities. And we do have a number of buildings, and this building itself is 3 buildings starting in 1918. So we do have some facilities needs. People have just picked up the job and done it, but we haven't had a specialist doing the work. So it's in the budget and to hire a person to do this half-time, maybe 25 hours a week. But with COVID, it wasn't the top priority. Now that things are loosening up time-wise just a little bit, we hope to post that in the next month or so. So there will be a position posted for a like 25 hour week facilities manager.
Quick follow-up. What are the responsibilities of that position?
Well, actually some hands-on work as well as big picture, putting RFPs out into the world and managing those processes. We have a custodial service. And so I'm working with a custodial company to make sure that they are doing the job that they've been hired to do. So some hands-on and some management planning, a little bit of both.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, I'm sure if you think of things later, Celeste would be happy to answer if you just want to shoot her an email. Thank you very much, Celeste.
Thank you all.
Jared, was that a question? No, okay. We'll move on to public input. And if anyone wishes to address the Urbana City Council, please raise your hand. I see Alan Max Axelrod.
Before we start, is this the real city council meeting or did I hop early on the mock council? I'm sorry.
This is the real city council meeting.
Okay, thank you. Could you put up the clock, please? Thank you. So Alan Max Axelrod, resident of Urbana, the campaign lead of No Ameren Shutoffs. This is a $0 all volunteer grassroots campaign spanning the state, north and south, east and west. We have over 4 dozen member organizations, and we are at a crisis. Last week, the Illinois Commerce Commission announced their plans to reopen. That is to say, they are going to resume utility shutoffs. And they sent a very misleading press release out this past Friday touting the consumer protections made available. Those consumer protections are weaker than the consumer protections that were put in place on September 22nd, 2 days before utility shutoffs started and 2 days before we started to have people being displaced. And that led 2 weeks later to an increase in our coronavirus caseload. Our caseload contemporarily is higher than it was back in mid to late September. Our vaccination rate statewide is around 25%. We had reached that benchmark maybe about a week ago. We are not going to fare better with weaker protections for utility services. And one of the things that is important to note is it is needless to weaken these protections. The money is being appropriated. The Trump administration, and with Mitch McConnell on his way out, passed the Appropriations Bill, or the Appropriations Act of 2021, and that act allowed the state government to appropriate federal funds to relieve rent and utility debt. It was introduced originally as Senate Bill 3066 during the lame duck session and was killed by Senator Laura M. Murphy. However, it's been reintroduced with abandon as HB 3877. Many of the same provisions in it, the funds will still be directly paid to housing providers and utility service providers to relieve the debt. And I've been talking to a journalist from a national outlet who has been in the state for weeks, talking to people whose utility debt was in the thousands. And I'm not just talking $1, $2, $3, $7,000 from some of the people that he just casually came across walking through a community. The service agency there was completely unable to point him to any of the people who had been disconnected. They just simply didn't know. And that is in part because unlike the Champaign County Health Department, the Champaign-Urbana Public Health Department, which requested shutoff notices and so knew where everybody was, in this community, they didn't. And we are going to be completely unable to request that again because that power lapses. It's only seasonal at the start of April, which means we're flying blind. The bill has passed out of the House. The sponsors included Carol Ammons, as well as the new House Speaker, Welch. We already got a Senate sponsor for the bill, who is not Laura M. Murphy, and a new state senator named Doris Turner has written that she has signed on as a chief co-sponsor. What we need you all to do is to help us hold the line, keep utility shutoffs from happening so that we can relieve the debt and reach herd immunity before those protections go away. Thank you so much and good night.
Thank you. Next up is Colin.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, awesome. My name is Colin Dodson, they, them, also a candidate for Ward 2. I want to highlight what Alan is talking about. It's absolutely critical that we maintain data on utility shutoffs and evictions, and that we do everything that we can to keep our community members safe. That being said, I wanted to, I guess, state my appreciation for the city's potential support. Looks like it's pretty solid for both the Champaign County healthcare consumers and First Followers. These are two fantastic community organizations that deserve all of the support that we can give them. So I would strongly encourage approving the grants that are on the table. And basically the ordinances on the resolutions on the consent agenda for these organizations, and that the community of Urbana continue and strengthen their support here. Thank you very much and have a good night.
Thank you, Colin. Next up is Meg McDonald.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, my name's Meg McDonald. My pronouns are she, they. I live in Urbana. I just wanted to pop in here to say a couple of things. Thanks to Jared for bringing up the One Door program last week. I think we were all kind of overdue for an update on that. People do wonder about it. I've been thinking about last week's discussion all week, honestly. I want to say that conversations around the police, their history, their local shortcomings are super important. And to say that having these discussions isn't focused enough is a failure on your end, not Jared or the public's. The cops had multiple opportunities to speak for themselves over the last year. Jared was the chair of last week's meeting and attempted to discuss how police don't prevent crime, meaning the money we pour into their department does nothing to eradicate homelessness, rent stress, mental health issues, domestic violence. For the mayor to try to belittle Jared, cut him off, and talk over him was too much. The mayor is endorsed or was endorsed by the police union. Between her and retired cop Bill Colebrook, how much time do you all get to speak? You need to stop cutting Jared off. You need to let him speak and listen. You didn't listen to me last week either. I was talking about Eugene, Oregon, and their separate mental health response number. Over the year that they implemented this CAHOOTS program, they had about 25,000 calls to this separate mental health number. So similar town size to Urbana, similar amount of calls made. And out of those 25,000 calls to mental health specialists and an EMT, only 0.6% of the time, only 100 something calls called for police backup. This is just an alternative that I wanted you to think about and Google, the CAHOOTS program. These conversations are worth having when we spend $11 million on cops in Urbana, but only 70,000 something on social services. And I know that we've made cuts to the library as well. To say bringing this up is unfocused is a privilege shown with callousness. Please consider these conversations when you're negotiating budget contracts or approving city budgets or interacting with the public or fellow council members. The police do have a violent racist history. You should look at civil rights protests of the past or present. Stonewall. You could Google some of this and step outside your own experiences, because while yours are not the ones affected by police violence, it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. And we know it happens nationally and locally. Yet you all choose to promote cops involved in brutality, have the conversations on your time, and talk over the only council member trying to have the hard conversations. It's unfortunate to watch. Do better. Thanks.
Thank you. Next up is Tracy Chong.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Tracy Chong from Urbana. I would like to comment more about tonight's discussion about the city's use of criminal background checks in the city's job application process and changes to the Human Rights Ordinance. Since the discussion about the city's use of criminal background checks in job applications was postponed last week, I'm going to reiterate that I hope that City Council can make a distinction between Urbana's broader human rights ordinance and what is allowed by the state when a background check is relevant to the job at the final stage of the hiring process. These are two different things, and I hope you guys actually discuss those issues. I also hope you discuss the implications and how intimidating it is when applicants are asked to agree to criminal background checks at the very early stages of the application process, and when it's even mentioned at the job ad stage. I'm also concerned about the changes to the Human Rights Ordinance. Even though the ordinance will include statements that require the city to follow the ordinance and hold itself to the same standards as it holds others, there's currently no concrete mechanism by which the city will be held accountable. Over the past year, we have seen example after example of what can go wrong when there is no mechanism or avenue to hold the city or its personnel accountable for their actions and decisions. When members of the public raised this concern at the last HRC meeting, it could not be articulated what exactly would happen if the city does violate the ordinance. It was just some vague answer about how the HRC would be producing some kind of report. And when I raised the doubt that this would be effective, Chairperson Rickberg asked why I would expect the worst. I don't know, I don't think I need to go into details to why I should expect the worst, because that's what we have been speaking up every single week for the past year, instance after instance where the city staff, the mayor, city council members, Urbana police officers, Urbana police leadership have violated state statutes, city ordinances, UPD policies. But each time we just make excuses. There's no real discussion or actions to give the public any confidence that these misconducts will not happen again. Up to now, we have not had any meaningful discussion on the very basic issue of accountability. Anyway, I hope when you discuss this tonight, you will discuss what matters. What are the mechanisms of accountability, and not just some vague answer that has shown to be meaningless over the past year. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Christopher Hansen.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thanks. Christopher Hansen. I'm not going to say much tonight. I will bring up another issue. It was just mentioned that there have been many instances where the city council has, or the city itself, I guess, has done something incorrectly or had some type of misconduct, and they never seem to acknowledge it or correct it. And so I'll bring up the issue of, I've actually brought this up 3 or 4 times before. The city is supposed to post its designated FOIA officer on its website and in its physical location, which right now would be the vestibule, I guess, at the city building. I just checked the website again. I brought this up at the last 3 or 4 meetings. You're still not posting your designated FOIA officer. Now it says the FOIA officer is the city clerk, but I'm pretty sure you guys just designated a different person to be the FOIA officer. And then you also have documents on the website which still indicate that Kurt Borman is a FOIA officer, and he hasn't been employed by the city since November. So this is just there are many, many more examples of this, and especially in regards to FOIA, but this is a very simple one that everyone can understand, where I've brought this to your attention, say 4 times, and you still won't do it. So that's what people are talking about when they're saying they're concerned about, accountability in the city being responsive to residents' concerns. That's just a simple example. I do look forward to the discussion tonight on the criminal background checks. I hope the discussion actually happens, because I think it's been kicked back like 4 times now, or three times now or something. And I'm going to kind of disagree a little bit with what some people said previously. I think last week, although I wasn't pleased with the discussion, I think last week you guys actually started to move in the direction of having a meaningful discussion. It could have been a much longer discussion, but it seemed to me that some of the members of the city council were actually jumping in and saying things where in the past we've had quite a bit of silence. So I appreciate that, and I hope to see the same kind of thing when you discuss criminal background checks tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Sarah Nixon.
Hello, City Council. This is Sarah Nixon. I would like to bring to your attention a serious issue concerning Urbana's Civilian Police Review Board. This week, the CPRB is officially announcing the resignation of yet another board member. So this is something like the 5th in the past year, or perhaps the number is even higher. The fact that board members have been resigning in waves should be a top priority concern for you, City Council. Ever since the public has been in attendance at CPRB meetings in droves, which began in earlier in 2020, essentially after the Aaliyah Lewis arrest incident, the appointees of the board have been dropping out like flies. Not everyone is jumping ship. Some members of the board are dedicated and committed to reform and to writing a transition away from incompetence to see the process through. But the narrative that we hear repeatedly from the mayor blames public participation for the exodus, bemoans and resents the public for daring to show up to meetings, for daring to criticize the CPRB's history of epic failure, and for daring to call for reforms that would reshape the board into a functional instrument that would serve civilians rather than protect the interests of law enforcement. But the reality is quite different. Board appointments are made by Mayor Marlin, who appoints friends of the police while overlooking the enormous pool of willing citizens who are fully competent, qualified, and ready to serve. This tactic should concern you greatly, as should the fact that board appointments are not open to people who have criminal records. These are the people who may have experienced police misconduct firsthand. These are the people who can bring the most valuable citizen insight to the CPRB oversight process. These issues, among others, concern us all, and it is urgent that the council bring meaningful and sustained focus to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to address the Urbana City Council? Not seeing any other hands raised. Okay, we'll move on to council input and communications. Any comments from council members? Okay. Seeing none. Any additions to the agenda? I did want to announce that one item will be pulled off the agenda tonight. It's under J, new business, item number 1, which is ordinance approving a reconsideration of the variance for the garage at 213 West Illinois Street. We've learned legally we cannot, the council members cannot move to reconsider once the session in which the vote was taken actually ended. So the applicant is going to be working with community development staff to explore other options for that particular project. And hopefully you may see that, well, you may see this before you again, but it won't be tonight for reconsideration. I apologize for the confusion on that. Next item is unfinished business. We don't have any tonight, and we move to reports of standing committees. Jared?
Right. Last week, the Committee of the Whole met and forwarded a number of items, in fact, all of the items on the agenda to the consent agenda for approval for this week. Before I go ahead with reading them off and the rest, were there any that anybody needed to remove from this before I go ahead and read them? I didn't hear any public comments on any of these either, so hopefully we'll be good to go. All right, just for the public's reference, all matters listed on the consent agenda are considered to be routine and non-controversial by the City Council and will be enacted by one motion and roll call vote. There will be no individual discussion of these items. If discussion is desired by anybody, as was just asked, then we would remove it and discuss it under the regular agenda, under the committee report. So for this consent agenda, we're going to move passage of resolution number 2021-03-11R, a resolution approving a City of Urbana Community Development Block Grant Program Agreement with the Champaign County Healthcare Consumers for COVID-19 Assistance. Resolution number 2021-03-012R, a resolution certifying a community housing and development organization for CHODO for the Urbana Home Consortium for First Followers. Resolution number 2021-03-013R, a resolution approving and authorizing the execution of an Urbana Home Consortium Community Housing Development Organization agreements, also relating to the CHODO for First Followers. a resolution number 2021-03-014R, a resolution approving and authorizing the execution of an Urbana Home Consortium Community Housing Development Organization Agreement, also for first followers. Those three ordinances for first followers. And then those three resolutions, two more ordinances. Ordinance number 2021-03-011, ordinance approving a special use permit for 701 East Florida Avenue that came from plan case 2415-S-21 for the Trinity Lutheran Church, and ordinance number 2021-03-012, an ordinance amending Schedule J of Section 23-172 of the Urbana Local Traffic Code, establishing curb loading zones on certain streets at the development whose name is escaping me right now. Gather Developments, yes. On behalf of the committee, I move approval of the consent agenda.
I'll second.
Moved by Jared, seconded by Mary Alice. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Sachs,
Yes.
Ms. Hersey,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mr. Colebrook,
Yes.
Mr. Miller. Mr. Miller.
Yes.
That motion passes. Next up, reports of special committees. Don't believe we have any. Reports of officers. I did want to let council and public know that the county board voted last Thursday to provide short-term funding to the Regional Planning Commission to cover their shortfalls that resulted from the delay in the audits being completed. So they voted to supply funds from both the general fund and then to borrow money to provide up to the $5.3 million that was requested. They're also working with county officials and the auditor and treasurer's office to get those, make sure those reports are done. So short term, the financial needs are being met and people are working hard to get the audits completed. So we'll keep you up to date there, and still trying to determine the exact short-term impact on these delayed audits on some of the programs. It's still being determined. Okay, we'll move on to new business. The only item under new business is the discussion of the City of Urbana use of criminal background checks, and that'll be led by Carol Mitten. And I believe we have some representatives from the Human Relations Commission, and Elizabeth Hannon will also be participating as well.
Elizabeth and I are going to run through some slides to begin with. And Elizabeth will start, and then we can take questions or have a discussion after we go through the slides.
Okay. I'm just going to share my screen here. All right. You should be seeing that. So if not, let me know. So before we launch into this, I do want to advise you that I'm one of the respondents in some of the pending matters that have come to the HRC related to the background check requirement. So as Carol said, we're going to tag team. I'm going to talk about some of our current practices, but I'm not going to discuss any specifics about the complaints. So our human rights ordinance has for many years allowed background checks to be used as long as they're used in a non-discriminatory manner. This applies to all employers in Urbana, not just the city. And some of the relevant ordinance language is in section 1237 of the code. Conviction record is added as a protected class. In section 1262C, it specifies that it's unlawful for an employer to inquire about protected status for a reason that's based wholly or partially on discrimination. In section 1262 F2, it says it's not unlawful to advertise a limitation if it's a bona fide occupational qualification. And in section 12105A, it talks about any practice that would be otherwise be discriminatory is not unlawful if it's justified as a business necessity. So back in 2013, and I think Fran actually circulated a document to you. There were some guidelines developed that the human relations officer at the time used to provide guidance to all employers in Urbana about how to implement this requirement. So those weren't formally approved by the HRC, but they were reviewed because they were just guidelines for the HRO. So those rules included the following: that employers may not inquire about conviction status on employment applications, that employers may provide accurate information regarding several things, including the fact that upon extension of a conditional offer, the employer intends to run a criminal background check. And it also lists a number of factors that an employer would have to assess before they would deny employment based on a business necessity. So some of those factors, and there's a longer list, but are, considering the facts or circumstances surrounding the offense, the number of offenses, the applicant's age at the time of conviction or release from prison, any evidence that the individual performed the same type of work post-conviction with no known incidents of criminal conduct, the length and consistency of employment history, rehabilitation efforts, and there are several other items mentioned that should be weighed. So now I want to turn to our practices at the city, which we believe are fully compliant with that guidance. So, and I just to be clear, I'm setting aside positions like police officer where there are specific requirements in the law. But we require background checks when there's a statutory requirement. Police officer would be an example of that, or a significant nexus with the essential functions of the job. Applicants are not asked about prior conviction on job applications. Background checks are conducted only after we make a contingent offer of employment and that contingent offer is accepted. And applicants are notified of any findings that might result in a denial of a final offer of employment, and they're given an opportunity to explain before we would make a final decision. I want to point out that I also reviewed these practices with the HRO who drafted the guidelines, and he agreed that he felt that we were in compliance. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Carol to talk to some specifics about one of the items.
So this initial complaint that I'm going to speak about is the one that you've heard us talk about that led to, me bringing forward the change about jurisdiction of the HRC. So the initial complaint is the one that had the informal hearing about jurisdiction and probable cause on November 10th, 2020. So I just want to add in this a little bit more detail because you've heard a lot about people, I think, extrapolating things from this complaint, but I want you to know exactly what it says. So the complaint states in part, the Urbana Civil Service Commission held a public meeting wherein they discriminated and conspired with city staff to further discriminate against individuals on the basis of an applicant's prior arrest or conviction record. And the complaint goes on to indicate that the named individuals did this by, quote, creating, voting for, and disseminating a job listing, which includes the requirement to pass a criminal background check. So the Jobs in question were job descriptions for a human resources assistant and human resources coordinator. Those position descriptions indicated that a background check would be required. And individuals in human resources typically have access to personal information, including social security numbers and all manner of employees' personal information. So next slide. So just so that everyone is on the same page about this, a job description is a document that describes the duties, responsibilities, essential functions, and necessary skills, experience, and qualifications for a specific position. So we include in this requirement in job postings so that applicants are aware of the requirement. They need to be aware of the requirement. We do not want applicants to be surprised by that requirement after they are far along in the process. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we did as a result of the November 10th hearing, and I had communicated this to the HRC in a memo, and I shared that with every council member as well, is that we made certain changes to the job ad and our job ads that require background checks, which is not all of them. They now include language saying that information obtained in background checks is considered in the context of the nature of the job, the nature of the offense, and the time that has passed since the offense, and an arrest or criminal conviction does not automatically exclude an applicant from consideration. So we have the job description itself, which states whether or not a particular job is subject to a background check. Then in the ads that are associated with those particular position descriptions, we explain to people how we apply that. And then finally, so the conclusions that we would like to draw your attention to is that this discussion has an implication for every employer in Urbana. It's not limited to the city of Urbana as an employer. And Elizabeth explained to you the document that the former HRO had shared with the Human Relations Commission. And that is how we educated employers about how to implement this particular aspect of the human rights ordinance. Any interpretation of the ordinance that makes criminal background checks de facto prohibited ignores the business necessity exception. And then finally, explaining in the job advertisement how the background check is used promotes transparency and fairness because applicants know what to expect. And also including it in the job description itself, they know going in whether or not they know whether there will be a criminal background check, and the advertisement tells them how we will go about doing that. So we think that's fair, that's transparent, and that's consistent with the ordinance. And Elizabeth and I are happy to take questions. And I know that at least I saw Francis with us, and yeah, and Pete too. Okay. So I guess the mayor will call on folks.
Any questions for Elizabeth, Carol, Pete, or Fran? Bill, and then Jared.
I wonder if you could expand a little bit on the business necessity exceptions. It seems like a lot could fall under that category, but then you also said that had to relate to the nexus of the position. Could you repeat that or rephrase it to make it a little bit clearer about when something is considered a business necessity exception?
Okay.
Seems to.
I think, okay, let me. Feel free to jump in here and help me out, Elizabeth, with the nexus piece. But I mean, I think we can give you some examples, and that might be the best way to do it. So for instance, what I tried to explain with these two positions in question about in the human relations office if you have access to people's personal information, if you have a history of a crime, a conviction of a crime that involved, let's say, stealing someone's identity. So there would be a nexus between having access to someone's social security number and the crime that you had been convicted of. In some of the financial positions that we have, people handle money, or that they have access to financial information that they could misuse. So if they had been convicted of a crime that involved any kind of financial crime or fraud, then that would be a nexus. So it's not just anything. And as Elizabeth tried to point out, it also has to do with how long ago it happened, whether or not the person was rehabilitated, and so forth. So it's not even when we find that there's a nexus and there happen to be some crime, some conviction in the background, that's not necessarily disqualifying either. That then generates a conversation. Is that responsive to your question?
I think that helps. Does this apply to any conviction or only felony convictions? I mean, it seems like at some level, and we know that with disparity and everything, at some level, say shoplifting or something, people are going to be more likely to get caught because of their race or because of various reasons, and other people who may have the same behavior don't get caught. So I think it's these kind of minor infractions that we want to be a little bit careful about, or be very careful about using to deny somebody a job. So is there a, do they have to be felonies? Let me start back with that again.
I think Fran wanted to jump in here.
Yeah, I really would, and I'm sure Pete would too. I'm really glad to hear, Carol and Elizabeth, that you've been said a little bit more about in the job listing about what that background check, how it might be used. But I think you haven't gone near far enough if you're going to list that as something that is the first thing the person sees when they're going to apply for the job. Because very few probably of the people with criminal convictions or prior convictions or arrests are going to have the specific thing that you're concerned about. So it would be very helpful and not have the chilling effect that ban the box was enacted to get rid of, if you were much more detailed about what you were looking for and what you were concerned about and how you were going to handle that information. Because if you don't get more specific about it, it's like putting something in the job description that says there will be a religious test, or you have to be of a certain gender or something like that. You owe it to these people. Yes, you don't want to surprise them, although that's another issue. But you also don't want to scare them off, and you don't want to you want to be specific because you don't want to kill a mosquito with a machine gun here.
So can I just say
yes,
something?
please.
And I just want to, as we go through this conversation, I'm happy to have as full a conversation as people want to have. I just want people to understand there's a continuum here, and there's some kind of idealized mechanism, and different people have their sense of what's the ideal. And some people on this Zoom that I'm looking at think the ideal is to say nothing about the practice and then only do it if it's, and then it only becomes known if at that point of a conditional offer. I don't happen to be in that camp, but everybody's got this idealized version. And then there's gradations of, well, this could be better, that could be better, that could be better. But then we cross a line at some point and we have discrimination. And so we can have all the conversation you want to have here, but I think we need to be really clear. Just because we disagree doesn't mean that we're all either on the discrimination side of the line or we're on the non-discrimination side of the line. There's different ways because we're accommodating a group of people that there is this gray area in our law that it's not black and white. That's what I mean by the gray area. I don't necessarily mean that it's ambiguous, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's discriminatory if we don't do everything everyone idealizes that we should. So, and there are members of the public who would say that if we don't do this idealized version, that we are discriminating and that we are breaking our own laws. And I just simply don't agree with that. So I just want to frame the conversation that way.
I agree with you. And, but what I'm saying here is that this is not occurring in a vacuum. There's a history here about how jobs discriminate against people with this kind of thing in their record. And when you put in a advertisement for a job, a very general statement about a criminal background check, or you must pass a criminal background check, and pretty much it stays at that level of generality, that is going to, people know that they are going to continue to be punished for something that they were arrested for, possibly not even convicted or convicted of. And chances are, given the mass incarceration that we've experienced in our country and the bases of a lot of those convictions, chances are that a lot of people who will be intimidated by that will not have anything, it will not have any nexus, and yet they will be intimidated and turn away. And that is why you may not have it on the application, but if you have it on the job description, it's very similar in its effect, in its chilling effect. I'd also like to say that the rules that we're talking about that Todd Rent wrote were approved by the HRC, and they were approved by the mayor. These are not unofficial, these are real. I just wanted to add that. So when you put it in an advertisement, you are advertising it. I think that the way it's being done, while improved, is still a problem. And I'm not saying don't ever do a criminal background check, but I don't think it's so bad if someone, has been given a conditional offer, I don't think you're going to shock anyone by telling them now, because of the nature of this work, they're going to have to look and see if you have a certain kind of thing in your record. That's a very different thing from putting it on the advertisement in general terms. I'm very concerned about that.
I've been thinking.
I'm going to
You're right.
I'm going to let Elizabeth weigh in. She had her hand up before.
I just also wanted to, as a point of clarification, I want to make sure we're clear that the job description is different than the job ad, right? And so I feel strongly that if we don't include that as a requirement in the job description, and then we apply it later at some point in the process, that can kind of be applied arbitrarily.
I'm sorry, I thought it was I thought those job descriptions were circulated.
Well, they are. The job description is the place where we define the duties and responsibilities, the essential functions, and the requirements for the job. But
does the potential applicant see that?
They can if they look, yes.
There you go.
But the issue is, if we don't make it clear in the job description whether that's required, or in most cases not required, somebody can just then it becomes arbitrary. There has to be a place where we say
right.
Required.
But it can be much more specific. It can talk about the nexus right there, so that someone who was busted for marijuana is not going to worry about it and shouldn't worry about it. Because the fact that you have a prior conviction is not in itself a necessary or sufficient indicator of moral rectitude or suitability for a job. And that's the position of the HRC. Yeah.
So I wanted to start by giving a more direct answer to Bill about this. The short answer is it is not limited to felony. The ordinance is any arrest or conviction. What the exception does is give you a defense, right? You have violated the ordinance unless these things happen. So I could, do a background check only on felony convictions for murder, right? And the person can still bring a complaint and say they advertised that they were doing a background check. They did the background check, and then they went and didn't give me the job. And I could still bring the complaint, and the city could say, or any employer could say, I only checked to see if they were convicted of murder. And the commission might still find that there was somehow some sort of discrimination going on. This is, and if you read through the entire set of, and I don't, these are not rules per se, right? I mean, it is a rule in the general sense, but this is the things that you can do as an employer to make sure that you stay within the bounds and guidelines for staying within those bounds. So if you're going to do a background check and you're going to advertise it and you're going to use it as some part of your decision, you better do it in this order and say it in this way in order to avoid it being discriminatory. These were not uncontroversial when they were discussed at the HRC. And when we voted to say that we would basically say that these were okay. You are doing things that are not strictly allowed by the ordinance, but if you do it in this way, you're likely to not run afoul of it. And so whatever whatever the commission might find for a particular case, whatever the city might put in a particular job app or job description, one thing, and I'm trying to be limited in how I say this because if a case were to come up in front of the commission, I don't want to corner what we might find. But if you say that it is a requirement of the job to pass a background check, you're running pretty close to the edge, because you're not saying we might do a background check and then we'll have a conversation after we have made a preliminary offer. You're saying you must pass this check, which doesn't describe how it will be used. It doesn't say we're doing the background check, but we're gonna follow up with you about this. It says you must pass it. And it's an interesting way to put things that seems tricky. So I hope that answers your question. It's not a solid defense to say we're reviewing all these things. You may have reviewed them and the commission might come to the conclusion that, yeah, well, but you didn't review them in a way that we think is non-discriminatory.
Carol?
So a lot of, I've been involved in numerous conversations on this topic, and so some of these things I've heard them before, and one of the things that, like in Pete's, and Pete's very thoughtful person, he knows that I only we're just having a conversation, but once you start to construe this could happen. Of course it could happen. Something could go, it could get misused, but that's when there's a legitimate case of discrimination. Not like, I could imagine how you could do that, how you could say this and then misuse it down the road. Of course. But it's at that point when someone should bring the claim of discrimination, when something has happened to an actual person with actual details and circumstances. Not this sort of like, oh, this is, I could see how the city of Urbana could just run amok with this. That's not discrimination. You might say, well, we'd like to narrow the guardrails, but that's not discrimination. So I just want to clarify that.
Any other questions for the commission? I think Jared, oh, I'm sorry. Go.
Just on the, I would agree that's not discrimination. I think it's a matter of, there's a difference between discrimination and how we want to implement our potential background checks when we need to. And I think that's the area that I would be concerned about. And I think you've addressed that with the advertising and I think was it in the ad or in the job description where it explicitly said that, I forget the word in a criminal conviction won't be.
You must pass a criminal background check is the wording.
No, the wording in the ad, Bill, I think what you're thinking of is an arrest or criminal conviction does not automatically exclude an applicant from consideration.
I think that helps a lot. And that's in the ad, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Jared, you had your hand up.
So, I mean, I've got a number of things, and one thing maybe Pete can weigh in on this, or I see our new city attorney Dave is here too, and maybe he has something to offer on this too. But I still can't swear how putting it in a job description or having it in an application doesn't run afoul of the Illinois state statute, the Job Opportunities for Qualified Applicants Act, where, you know, literally the language pretty, I don't know, plainly states to me that you can't ask or mention or even talk about a criminal background check until certain things have been a process has been reached, such as an interview has been offered or a conditional offer of employment has been made. I mean, the language seems pretty clear with that act. And so I still am struggling to even see why this is a discussion that we're even doing this when that language exists. So that's my first question I'd like to get some clarification on.
So I think your argument is equally valid for our ordinance. 1262 E2 in relevant part. It is unlawful to print or publish or cause to be printed or publish any notice or advertisement or use any publication form relating to employment by such an employer or to membership or classification or referral by employment or labor organization or employment agency, indicating any preference, limitation, specification, or distinction based on discrimination, right? And in order to get by that, you would have to show that that discrimination and remember the exception is where it's a bona fide occupational qualification necessary for employment or hire, you know, and then there's the thing about hiring. But the notice or advertisement can't do it unless it's a bona fide occupational qualification, which means you're going to have to defend what precisely you're looking for in that background check that is a bona fide qualification. Now, the fact that we put out this rule, and I say we, the fact that the HRO at the time put out this rule was we were fully aware that people were doing background checks. We were fully aware that even if we told them not to, they could do it in secret and no one would know any the better. But it was the notice part that was the key thing. And if you're going to put it in the notice, you better show the bona fide qualification. And you know, the place where I disagree with what Carol said was it's not the mere act of discriminating in the job, in granting the job that's at issue here. It's the advertisement itself. The advertisement itself, by doing that, that indicates that you might discriminate, is enough to break the ordinance.
But I think that's the thing, Pete, is you say you're advertising that you might discriminate. It's like, no, we're advertising that we're going to use our bona fide, our authority that's granted for bona fide occupational requirements. You're assuming that by saying it, we're going to discriminate. And I'm saying you can only have that be true with a specific individual and a specific set of circumstances.
But again, the law is, the ordinance is that you can't indicate any preference, limitation, specification, or distinction based on one of those categories. You said we're going to have a criminal background check. Now you're going to have to show that the thing that you are searching for is a bona fide occupational qualification, which means to me that should you put that advertisement in, someone can instantly make the complaint before they've been denied any job offer, before they've been, you know, even applied for the job. They can say the notice is discriminatory, at which point you would have to, as the city or any employer, would have to prove that it is in fact a bona fide qualification. And even if I was convicted of identity theft, I'm going to say there's a whole list of things that I could have done. You're going to have to show me not just that there's this list of things, but that you actually, it's this list of things that I have done that would violate, that would make it a bona fide occupational qualification. I think the burden of proof is being switched is all I'm saying.
I see Dave popped in. Maybe the mayor could call on him.
Would the city attorney have something to say about this?
Thanks. That's part of the reason I kind of popped in my video on thanks to Councilmember Miller too for suggesting perhaps at least a couple of comments for me, and apologize for the glare off my glasses in this room. But I guess first, because I think this will kind of tail into the piece of the discussion that Pete kind of commented on, is that people ask me, well, can I be sued for this, right? As a generalization, can I be sued for this? The answer is always yes, regardless of whether the complaint is valid or not. Okay. And so so my take on the idea of the HRO, the ordinance on the provision, I apologize. I thought I had the ordinance in my file here to kind of refer specifically to it, but I apologize, I don't. But so if I misspeak, certainly I think Administrator Mitten or Pete or Fran, you can kind of comment if I'm off track a little bit. But in the ordinance, it says it's not discrimination if you use it in this fashion. So in a sense, I don't necessarily see it as a complete just exception or defense. It literally says it's not discrimination, and meaning that the complaint could not be filed at the very outset. Now, having said that, the complaint could be filed regardless, right? And so, Pete, you're not wrong in considering the ideas that the city would then have to defend it. But I think that's where I see, you know, maybe, and I don't mean this word to sound bad, and if it's the wrong word to use, I apologize, is a little bit of a disconnect on the idea of the thought about how this can work relative to the ordinance and potentially the statute. Again, I apologize, I don't have the statute in my file either to try and refer specifically to it. But I think that's kind of how we're trying to address the balance here of the idea. I think we all understand that if there are BFOQs, bona fide occupational qualifications, that relate to the idea of potential convictions, we all understand that that's possible, and they can be used, I think, in terms of the decision making on whether to hire someone or not for a particular position. And so I think it comes down to, as I think Administrator Mitten was commenting early on, is how do we develop it to the point where maybe not everybody is exactly happy, but people always understand it and are okay with how this process is going to look going forward in terms of, the job description itself, any advertisement for that particular job, and then ultimately also, as Administrator Mitten described, and as Ms. Hannon described as well, is the actual logistical process when you're looking at them and have the possibility for the person to come in and offer an explanation of how, that this shouldn't necessarily be counted against them for A, B, and C, on that. And so, that's kind of how I see it at the moment, I suppose, is that, we recognize the idea of trying to reach the balance here. And I think the ultimate idea is how do we kind of get there to be consistent going forward and understand that, people see it as, we're not trying to discriminate. We're not trying to violate the ordinance in and of itself for these kinds of things. We're merely trying to be transparent and have people understand, at the very, in my mind, again, at the kind of the beginning, relative to this, because what I find invariably is that a lot of times when people end up wanting to file suit or a complaint is they're upset. I mean, they're mad. And so, the question becomes is, are they going to be madder up front? And I get the idea is that you're maybe dissuading people from applying because of the way of how that maybe is worded in the sense to try and help alleviate that concern at the beginning. But if, I see the side of it too, where if you wait until the very last possible moment before you say, yes, you're hired, and say, oh, by the way, we need to do a background to make sure that there's no convictions that really relate to the nature of this job. I could see people being more upset at that very point because now they are going to feel that they wasted all of their time hoping on this job, and all of a sudden now something happens where they're concerned. And again, I'm not saying this happens every time. Obviously, we're going to run into maybe one or two applicants that maybe fall in this category. I wouldn't want to suggest that it's 98% of the people applying will end up in this kind of capacity or on this particular path. But I see the concept of how do we allow people to understand that this is going to be a part of the process, and when do we let them know that, at the beginning or at the end?
And I do want to just emphasize here as we sort of, I feel like people are wanting, I want Urbana to do something different, but whatever standard you feel that you have to hold the city to in terms of like really parsing this out, that becomes the standard that everyone is held to in Urbana. And that is, I'm telling you right now, that is not what we have promulgated to our employers. So there's, just know this is not just a conversation about the city of Urbana or, as a government. This is about all employers in the city.
Okay. Jared, you had other questions?
I just want a quick follow up with Dave. So I know you don't have the statute in, maybe we, I don't know, need to dive a little further into it, but, I just, it's like what Pete said, and I do get that we're kind of, now we're finagling with this idea of, well, should we ask later? Should we be upfront about it? And if we, at whatever point we disclose it, how do we disclose it? I think all of those are extremely important, but I also think that the conversation of upfront or later would be moot if the Job Opportunities for Qualified Applicants Act supersedes this, even asking the question about doing it at the front or at the back, because it seems to me like it says that you can't, you may not inquire about or into, consider, or require disclosure of criminal record or criminal history of the applicant until determined blah, 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 for an interview, or if there's not an interview until a conditional offer. That seems pretty straightforward to me. That's more like well, you just don't do it on the face. You have to do it on the back end. I just want to hear your thought on that specific part, Dave.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I really do wish I had the kind of statute in front of me. And again, not that this necessarily is the driver for it, but one of the things I try and look for when there may be a little bit of a difference between a statute and a city ordinance is whether or not the statute preempts home rule authority to act in that particular area. If it does, and it says you can't do anything that's inconsistent with the statute, obviously that's absolutely clear. And if a statute doesn't, then it somewhat is a question mark a little bit. And I'm not saying that you wouldn't want to take the statute into consideration regardless, but it wouldn't necessarily put a city in a position where it couldn't do something that they felt was more appropriate than what the statute maybe provides. And so certainly understand the nature of the statute, certainly understand the nature of the conversation about, the concept of trying to ensure that people who, might have a good background for the position aren't dissuaded from applying by the suggestion of having to do this as part of the process. But that's where I figure is it gets one of those things where I think it's almost like a melding of a lot of things to try and reach a position that everybody's comfortable with going forward on how do we want to put these kinds of things out there. Because certainly, as I shared internally, there's a big difference between hiring a laborer and hiring someone in the finance department who's going to be handling money. And so I can certainly understand the nature of the conversation about the idea of specificity, but I think, part of to look at how to do this is, ultimately, as Administrator Minton suggested, is how far do you end up going on that? It's similar to creating a list. Once you create a list, you're stuck with the list, good or bad, and then people will say, well, you should have added this piece to that and taken this one out. So, when you create the idea of the language that you may use for this is, again, it's going to be, somewhat people's thoughts on, well, I wish it would have been worded this way, or I wish it would have been worded that way. And so, we just need to be comfortable with the ideas, how we want to establish this without putting people off, I guess, either way.
Carol, and then we'll move on to other council members who may have questions.
I do just want to slow down the reading of the act and what it says. So I'm just going to slow walk it, what Jared had said. An employer or employment agency may not inquire about or into, consider, or require disclosure of the criminal record or criminal history of an applicant until the applicant has been determined qualified for the position and notified that the applicant has been selected for an interview, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't say you can't notify them of the requirement. It says you can't ask them about, consider, or require disclosure. And we violate none of that. So I think that that you have to look at precisely what it is saying and then put that up against what we do. And I think we're in bounds of what the act says.
I don't know if I agree with that. I mean,
well, did I just read the word? What part don't you agree with? What the words are? No, seriously.
No, I'm looking at it. No, you read it exactly as
okay.
It's written. No, I'm just disagreeing with your interpretation, not about what's written in it. The specific part is require disclosure of, right? Require disclosure of. Now, when, for example, this was going to be my next point, and I'm sorry, to other council members that I'm taking up so much, because I'm sure other people have questions too. I appreciate the chairs letting me continue before I come back. But that part is the big part. In I don't know if everybody else looked at what Christopher Hansen had sent to us about as he went through a job application on the website, but there's almost 3 places where the criminal background check is mentioned, and in fact, it won't even let you submit the application on the website unless you have the consent to disclose your criminal background check checkbox checked. So you literally can't even finish the application unless you consent to the criminal background check. Like
that was a Urbana Free Library application process. I would just note it wasn't a City of Urbana process.
Well, in either case, I think the principle still of that wording, or required disclosure of, is where it comes into conflict. To me, that's a clear conflict of asking or requiring someone to pass a criminal background check in an application. you know, that's where I'm reading that, and I'll quit belaboring that point, but and hear what other folks have to say.
Okay, let's move on to other council members who had questions. Mary Alice.
So mine isn't necessarily a question. I think one of the things that we're struggling with right now is the delineation between the practice of how background checks are used and how background checks are reported in the job description or the advertisement. So there's two things there. One, there's the process, kind of the HR process, right? And the other one is the paperwork that we have. You know, if I was to write the rules, this is what I would say. I would say that the city of Urbana should not include any information about conducting background checks in the advertisement. And the reason is because it's very complicated. All the stuff that we've been talking about tonight is all these different rules in terms of, well, how would it be used? And it's not possible to actually go into that much detail into an advertisement. So why make people worried about it? Then in the job description, which is kind of the, you know, what's on file at the city, you have more time there to describe if it is an occupational, if it is a bona fide occupational qualification for that specific position. You can put in the job actual description that says, this is a position that requires access to personal information and is considered a bona fide occupational qualification for you to pass certain kinds of background checks, so to speak. I'm not the wordsmith here, but my point here is that I think that we would satisfy the idea that we don't want people to get the assumption that we're going to discriminate based on these different items that we've, you know, said in the HRC. If we don't include that in the job app, we can go into more detail in the job description, and then we can talk about the whole process other side. So I'd really like to keep, if possible, this conversation around the job advertisement and the job description, because the whole other thing is long. So those are my comments.
Fran, did you want to say something? I saw you waving out of the corner of my eye. So
I was waving frantically. Yeah. I just want to say that two things. One, that it's very important, I think, for the people in the city who are advertising and hiring people to bear in mind what you are actually looking for. And what you are actually looking for is not someone without a conviction or arrest, or even someone who committed fraud sometime in the past, or someone who has no such record. What you are looking for is an honest person. And if that is the quality you're looking for, that's the quality you should stress. And I completely agree with Mary Alice's statement that the mentioning of criminal background has no place in an advertisement. But you can talk about honesty and a proven record of honesty, things like that. You can look for character, but don't base it on something as problematic as a conviction, unless you really think it applies in this case much later on in the process. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, I would be very interested to know what, in fact, the city is promulgating to its employers, because I thought it was promulgating the ordinance. And if anything, these guidelines that Todd Rent developed. And if the library, the blessed library, is doing something that makes it hard for someone to even apply without giving permission to have their background checked, I don't mean letters of reference, I'm talking about criminal background, then something has gone wrong in Urbana.
So, go ahead. Maybe
That's all.
I'll let the mayor call in. I keep
Sure.
jumping.
Was it Elizabeth?
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, to be fair, I don't think Celeste is on here right now, but there may be special requirements in the law pertaining to library employees because they often work with children, much like employees in schools.
Okay.
I don't know
They
that.
should say that, though.
I believe that is true. So I just need to stick up for them a little bit.
Yes, that's fine. And I want to say that let's not get too hung up on the particular complaints that have come in, because they are really no longer operative. And what we are going to be dealing with going forward is reports of concerns that the HRC is going to try to, by diplomatic means, correct in the city. And no, we don't have a process for it yet, Ms. Chong, but we will, and it will be specific and it will work, hopefully, and it will get improved over time. So I'd just like to add that. What happened in these complaints isn't really relevant.
I will add, I did ask about the library position. It was specifically for the IT position, and that person has access to everything. So
that isn't, whoops,
yeah.
That doesn't mean it's required by a state or federal law that there be no criminal background.
No, but anyway, that's what the position was for. Who was next? Dennis.
I really appreciate Mary Alice's take on it, that we shouldn't be discouraging people at the application process from seeking employment at no matter what level. Just as we don't specify specifically what kind of background experience that they have to have when they apply, but we discuss it during the interviews, and we then look for details about what kind of what is the depth of their experience to fulfill, say, a managerial position or an organizational position. And we should have the same attitude about accepting and being open to applications from a wide variety of individuals. And then if their position happens to have a very particular sensitivity, we can go into that discussion during the interview process, or if it's requiring character references to support the application, one can say, well, we're looking for a certain kind of character reference, a certain kind of individual proof of individual qualities, and we can get into those things then. But I would certainly not start laying those kinds of expectations down at the very application process. And you know that a lot of people apply for jobs that they're not really qualified for, but they're having the experience of having interviews, or they're just trying to get a job. And they're being, we shouldn't be discouraging people with the highest level of discernment at the very beginning of the process. That comes later.
Any other council members wanting to weigh in? Eric.
So perhaps another way of navigating this is to have on the Human Resources website for the city, its policy and the laws and ordinances that underlie that policy. This could be analogous to, for example, what the University of Illinois Human Resources does, where it does specifically say that anyone accepting an offer of employment will have a criminal background check done. So at some point, you have to be honest and say what the policy is clearly. Otherwise, you're saying you want an honest person as an employee, but if you're not going to tell them what the process is up front, that's not very honest either. So we have to have a clear policy that is communicated to the public, including job applicants.
Any response? Carol, and then Bill Brown, had your hand up.
Well, I just want people to be clear about what we have told employers. And this is explicitly what we've told employers, okay? That's what's in these rules. And for anybody that has it, it's on page 18 under, it's 4E. And it's under a heading, application of law to covered employers. And then it says, the following rules shall apply to all covered employers, A, B, C, D, E. Covered employers may, at any time, provide to applicants or potential applicants accurate information regarding the following. Number one, the duties and responsibilities of the applied for positions, and two, whether upon extension of a conditional offer, the employer intends to run a criminal background check on the applicant. That's at any time. That means including the advertisement. So again, this is not just about the city of Urbana government as an employer. This is about everybody that we have gone out and tried to explain our ordinance. And as Fran and Pete both said, the HRC approved these rules, and that's explicitly what it says. So we can change that if that's what people desire, but that's not what we said.
Bill Brown.
Yeah, I think the HRC is well qualified to figure out the details about whether the Urbana or other employers are meeting the ordinance. But I think as a city, we can go a step above if we feel that, by putting the language past a criminal background check in an ad, I think it does have a chilling effect on getting qualified candidates, and whether or not it violates the ordinance shouldn't prevent us from not using it. So I would disagree on that minor point that we have to be the perfect example of what you can get away with rather than perfect example of what we'd like to see.
Is that a hand, Pete?
And just to be real careful about what Carol pointed out, you can, according to this rule, publish at any time, whether upon extension of conditional offer, the employer intends to run the background check. That does not include saying you must pass, for whatever that might mean, a background check. The other thing that I think it's worth pointing out to folks as you read through the guidance to employers is the comparison that's made with the Americans with Disabilities Act, because you can't discriminate on the basis of a disability. And I think we all agree that you can't in a job advertisement say, you can't apply for this job if you have a disability, or we're going to do a disability check on you. And there's a whole discussion in the beginning of this document about figuring out what the essentials and marginals, which is the language used when you're doing a disability check, would be like when you do a criminal background check. That you actually would have to list out what kinds of convictions and what kinds of risks you're trying to, alleviate. So it's what's written is really pretty subtle and pretty carefully worded. And I think it's why, speaking as an individual who was on the commission at that time, I think that's why I was okay with the way that Todd had proposed to go forward with this. It actually does carefully go through this little dance you have to do. And all that said, of course, without concluding what an application should or shouldn't look like, I do like Bill's idea that the city should probably be the shining example of how to do an application for other employers.
Is there any council member who hasn't weighed in yet who wanted to speak? Okay. Fran and then Jared.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I just had a question for Carol. The guidelines, there was kind of a scramble to get a copy of these because I wanted to provide it to the commission. I mean, to the council. But you say you do use it and show it to employers. And I was wondering if it's anywhere on the city website or what copy you use. I would certainly like to see that. And so we're on the same page, literally.
No, it's my understanding. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Jessica, it's my understanding that it's never been put on the city website, but I believe in 2013 or 2014, there was a mailing and it was distributed to employers, but you're right, it probably should be on the website, a more cleaned up version. I don't know why it's never been there.
And my understanding is that it was the basis for a series of educational, I don't know, workshops or briefings for employers in the past.
I just thought maybe you had personally used it, and I was okay.
I actually went out on some of those briefings.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
They were sometimes amusing.
Jared, you had a comment?
Yeah, I don't know, Carol, if you got what I had just sent you a minute ago, but I just sent you an email that is the language at the bottom of that statute. Well, not at the bottom, at the bottom of that first section, under section 15, under C, where it says, and this kind of, I think, clarifies where we're going with this a little bit. This section does not prohibit an employer from notifying applicants in writing, I guess that could be interpreted whatever way that you want, of the specific offenses that will disqualify an applicant from employment in a particular position due to federal or state law or the employer's policy. So in my mind, that kind of gets to the core of it, where, you know, I think right now we're blanketing the language too broadly in, you know, just generally saying what we're saying in the application process, in the job posting. And I don't, you know, while, you know, I think the criminal justice system and you know, going beyond it to continue punishing people, there's an argument to be made there that's very, very strong. And of course, this is, you know, this is going to be an extraordinarily rare situation that you're going to have somebody who's been convicted of identity theft applying for an IT position, I guess, you know, unless they've stolen someone's identity to do it. And that's why we're doing the background check. I don't know, you know, but I feel like this is an extraordinary situation we're talking about. And the more we make it clear that it's only in an extraordinary situation that, you know, you may have, you know, something in your background that is going to be considered in a job application, you know, that's the kind of language that should be out there. And doing something like using that section C to outline, you know, hey, you're applying for an IT position. Here are specific things that if they're in your criminal background check are going to disqualify you from this position. The city, you know, we as the employer or employers within the city are not going to consider anything that is not these particular things in consideration of this job, so that it's very clear to an applicant that that's what it is. I mean, I think that's maybe where the sweet spot in between the don't say anything about it at all and don't be too broad in how we're portraying it might find resolution for this.
Eric.
So speaking to Jared's comment there, I think the problem with being very, very specific and saying only for X, Y, and Z is that you may not have thought of the whole set of possible things ahead of time that you might come across that would give you good reason to pause and say, hey, this is a nexus, this is a problem. And I worry a little bit about, you know, you said, oh, maybe, you know, someone who's convicted of identity theft wouldn't apply for an IT position. I don't think you want to be encouraging Urbana as a place where people who have propensity to commit a certain crime perhaps would apply to Urbana because they know they could find a place to do it here. So you have to balance the risks both ways.
But now you're talking about discriminating against people for criminal backgrounds. Like you literally just spelled out discriminating against somebody for a criminal background thing. Like that could be completely irrelevant. And that's what we're talking about.
Mary Alice, and then Fran.
So just to understand what Jared's point was, and since we've been talking about throughout the HR process, is Jared, are you saying that once, for example, if you want to interview somebody, you can send a letter and say, you know, we really want to interview you for this position and so forth. Just so you know, this position does require you to have access to personal identifying information, and therefore, in some instances, a background check might cause for further discussion or something, some kind of like little narrative there that talks about how the job duties could potentially interact with some kind of conviction. But that would only be done at like the interview process. It wouldn't be done at the actual job ad. That's what I'm just trying to figure out. Where would that be in that process?
Yeah, and I think that's what the state statute kind of makes pretty clear. I think I'm not even talking about our ordinance, because I think our ordinance is even more restrictive than any of this. So I'm trying to keep it to the baseline level that I think even applies, and I think that's the state statute, which is my reading, my interpretation, where in that part where it says that not to disclose, then I think that eliminates the application part. But it says if you've been selected for an interview or conditional offer has been made, then that would come up. That's where that disclosure happens that that I'm describing. And Eric, to your point about this is again I get your point. It's the hypothetical problem of like, well, can we imagine all the hypotheticals that could possibly eliminate somebody from a job, and do we have to spell out every single one of those hypotheticals? No, I don't think that's what I'm getting at. But we can be more specific than just the general description of must pass a criminal background check in disclosing of that. I know Pete's got a thought about that, because I just saw him raise his hand.
I think Fran wanted to weigh in.
Well, a lot of good things have just been said by Mary Alice and Jared. But I'd like to say that you can say in a letter, the kind of letter that Mary Alice suggested, you can say something like looking for things such as, you don't have to have a definitive list. And I agree, I want to emphasize it's very important not to get yourself in a position where you are relying on the presence or absence of a criminal record, a criminal conviction, as some kind of indicator of moral rectitude, because it isn't either necessary or sufficient and should not be used in that way. And that's what all of this legislation is about. And I think it's pretty clear that we should be very, very cautious in how we use it. So we start thinking of it in the same way we think about other protected classes, because it's just like them. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Pete,
Yeah, to respond to Eric, and this was a conversation we had with employers at the time. The situation you laid out, the hypothetical you laid out, is we've gone and looked at this person's resume and it's great. And we've gotten their letters of recommendation and they're fabulous. And the person's job history is unblemished. And yet they have this criminal conviction, and that's the disqualifying characteristic. And the answer is never happens, because you're going to check, all sorts of things. And if the criminal conviction is literally the only thing on their record that is the problem, and yet they have all of these glowing recommendations, A, you probably should offer them the job and they should probably get it. And B, they're going to be in front of the commission anyway saying, I was perfect. They clearly discriminated on the basis of the criminal background check and therefore are violating the law. So I mean, we had to explain this multiple times to employers, but really this situation doesn't come up.
Sharice.
I've been listening to everybody trying to digest all of this. I guess what I would like to know is that, can it be simply dealt with regarding how we determine a person's criminal background. I don't even like using the word criminal, but let's just because it could be something as small as shoplifting or whatever. But let's just say, by just saying, you know, application may require, and not will require, but may require that that we checked for a criminal record, or just changing the words regarding this position, not what you're not, you know, if you got popped for something when you were 16 and you're 36 and you're applying for a particular position, and that thing that you got popped for has nothing to do with the position that you are applying for, wouldn't it just be just the language that is used, could that ameliorate the situation as far as being between that rock and a hard place? Because that's what it seems. I'm not, I know I've had to go through background checks and so on and so forth. So having not having a record, and not having, you know, been too scared. I'm more scared of my mother than I was of the police. So, you know, not having that kind of experience, that rebel without a cause period in my life, I wasn't worried about it. But there, you know, and that's not, and I'm not trying to say I'm perfect. I don't expect perfection from anybody. But maybe just changing the language to say may instead of will, or, you know, this particular job may, you know, for your information, you know, we may require at the end of the interview, before offer of employment or something like that. Would that change anything? Anybody?
Jared?
Yeah, Sharice, and I think you're exactly right that that language is extraordinarily important, and that's one of the things I was trying to get across with the, you know, and Pete's been trying to get across with the must pass language, and needing to, you know, use something, and, you know, it could be as simple as, you know, like in the slideshow, we have that list of city practices where it says background checks are required only when there is a statutory requirement and a significant nexus with the essential functions of the job. Even that I feel like strong, but even saying that, you know, when you get to that portion of, you know, the job is, you know, I think it's important to post it on the city website, you know, like in straight plain language, and as expansively as possible, how background checks are only considered in the context of the entire application, in the whole, you know, picture of a candidate. They will never be used as a discriminatory factor in hiring. They will, you know, only be used according to these practices, which have been approved, you know, by our HRC and so on and so forth.
Yeah, but even using the word only, it to me, it puts you in a box, you know. Not necessarily have absolute language, but have gray area language, I guess, because a person that has been convicted or found, I mean, unless you are looking for that, for a position to be filled to keep other people from stealing your identity or something, you're not necessarily going to hire a person who does that for or did that in the past. But I'm just saying, it is, maybe this should be more gray area language. It is possible that, or it is a probability that that we will be looking. and maybe that could solve even what we're talking about, because it seems to me in listening to everybody's like we're constantly between that rock and a hard place of when do we protect, how do we protect our how do employers and protect their what they're trying to do, and without actually discriminating against somebody who may you don't know the character of a person when you're interviewing them. You don't know what they're capable of, and that's just been obvious for the past 4 years with a person that was sitting in the White House. So we didn't get to interview him, but it's one of those things where you just don't know how far some people will go. So or what they may be hiding. And I do think it's important that they have knowledge that this could possibly happen, but I don't know that it's something that has to be so absolute as you must pass. You understand what I'm saying, Jared?
Yeah, I get you.
Okay.
I'll wait for other comments.
Well, I'd like to summarize what we've heard so far. This isn't an action item tonight, but this has been a really good discussion. So what I've heard so far tonight, and please tell me if I didn't hear correctly. Number one, people agree that it's very important for the city to be transparent about the practices that it follows. That's what this discussion is about. So that's what we need to focus on. And that includes the policy, the ordinance, any state, if there's other laws that apply. But state up front what underlies our policy. We need to be very consistent with our processes in hiring, whether it's, it doesn't matter what the position is, but we need to follow a consistent process. And we do. I mean, I've been involved now in enough hiring within the city, and we do have a very consistent process. But the question is also, at what point in the process do we talk about the possibility of us running a background check on the individual? It could happen, currently happens at the point of both the job description and the job advertisement. I'm hearing that people do have concerns about it being in the job advertisement as currently stated, which I believe refers to the need to pass a background check. That language could be modified and better explained if we leave it in the job ad, or could be taken out altogether. But at some point and consistently, we need to be notifying applicants of the possibility of them experiencing a background check. I think we need to, if the state, it'd be interesting to know what the state statute actually requires of the city and whether or not there's a home rule exemption. I don't think anybody's actually determined that or not yet, but we need to know what the state law is saying. And we could put more information on the city's website. Anything else? Jared?
I think the other one that I might suggest is the consideration of removing the button that must be selected consenting or acknowledging the criminal background thing in the online application as well. Disclosure wherever it's happening, probably, if we're gonna do it in the application process still or whatever, should just be a disclosure. I don't know that it should require a checkbox to be checked in order to complete the application.
Which button are you talking about?
It's let's see.
I don't think the city, does the city, are you talking about the library application?
Well, from what I understand, is there a different application portal for city applications? Because it says the City of Urbana and Urbana Free Library employment application.
Elizabeth can answer that.
So just to clarify, they share our portal, like we share many things, like our financial system, but we don't create their job postings, they do. So they may be different, correct?
Well, okay, well, I mean, regardless, if it does exist in ours, we should figure out if it does. And I believe it's under the, under section 5, under the job questions. So it should say job ID, the job number, and then questions. Right now, it's question 7, due to sensitive and confidential nature information encountered, of course, where a candidate must satisfactory, I agree, understands, must be checked in that. At least that's when the one that was given to us. So if it, I don't know if it's in the city's 1-2, it looks like it would be in both, but if it's there, I'm just arguing that it should be a disclosure. Sure, if we're deciding that it should be there, but it should be a button you have to click to complete it. That's the only other one, but I think you got everything else that we've discussed that we need to like make some final determinations on, Dan.
Anyone else want to weigh in? Fran?
This isn't a correction to anything you wrote. I just feel compelled to say that I think the city should be very careful about seeking a home rule exemption to the state law. I think it should follow the state law, particularly Urbana, which prides itself in being enlightened and progressive, should not have a home rule exemption that makes it do the more regressive, less enlightened thing. That's just my editorial comment.
Understood. I just like to know what the law actually says. So.
Oh, of course. Well, yes, of course.
Place to start. Any other comments?
It's a pretty short statute. It's only like 3 paragraphs. It'll take you one scroll on a page to read through it, and I didn't see any home rule language in it when I read it. But I don't know, maybe there's a reference in there that I'm missing.
Still working my way through the American Rescue Act, which is 700 pages plus. So.
Well, that one will make for light reading then.
Okie doke. All right, well, this is a lot to digest. We'll go back and consider these things and come back. Thank you for the input. Thank you, Fran and Pete. We apologize for bumping you multiple times, but I think this was worth the discussion. Appreciate it very much. And the correspondence from the HRC, I hope to respond to either tomorrow or the next day. So be watching for that. And that will be related to an update on the search for the Human Rights and Equity Officer, which I'll also share with City Council when the letter's finished. So, okay, let me go back to my agenda, which I think we've reached the end of this discussion, and with no further business before this meeting, we'll stand adjourned. Thank you very much.
Good night.
Good night.